Un buongiorno dalla redazione del Bo Live, è Daniele Monte d'Arpizio che vi parla, Francesca Bastianon alla regia parte tecnica. Siamo qui con Leonard Smith, uno storico americano che ci parlerà della Prima Guerra Mondiale, perché in questo periodo, questi 5 giorni, a Padova ci sono storici e sociologi e geografi provenienti da tutto il mondo per parlare della Prima Guerra Mondiale, che proprio a Padova, per quanto riguarda l'Italia, finì esattamente un secolo fa. The 5 different armistices in Europe. Can you talk about this issue?
Yes. Well, thank you for interviewing me. The armistices began at really in some ways at the margin of the end of the conflict. The first armistice was actually with Bulgaria and was signed at Salonika, the now Greek city of Salonika, at the end of September. And essentially the Allied forces in Greece had been almost interned there for most of the war. It was a very stable front. And then in the fall of 1918, the Greek, Serbian, and French forces under French General Francesca Bastianon broke out and shattered the Bulgarian position, and the Bulgarian army essentially collapsed. It was very poor, it was very under-equipped. And so the Allies came rushing into the Balkans. And the Bulgarian government asked for an armistice right away. Now, this had what we would call a domino effect, because one of the problems was that the collapse of the Bulgarian front laid open the road to Constantinople, today's Istanbul. And so the position of the Ottoman Empire became untenable, coupled with the British advance through today's Palestine. So the Allies are advancing on Constantinople through the Balkans and they're advancing on the Ottoman Empire through Palestine. So the Ottomans signed the armistice of Mudros on the Greek island of Mudros about a month later. And then by this time, with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, this in some way, and the advance of the Allied armies on the Western Front, this makes the Austro-Hungarian position more and more untenable. So finally, the Austro-Hungarians ask for an armistice, which is then signed right near Padua at the Villa Giusti on November 4. And what's interesting is that because the Habsburg monarchy is breaking up into its Austrian successor states and a Hungarian successor states, the Hungarians sign a separate armistice in Belgrade in Serbia, today's Serbia, 2 days after the German armistice on November 13. And along the way, of course, what British and Americans and French think of as the armistice is actually the armistice with Germany, signed in Rétombe on November 11.
Which were the consequences of the 5 armistices in the Treaty of Versailles?
Right. One of the interesting things about the armistices with Germany is that the Allies thought it was one thing, and the Germans thought it was another thing.
Traumland.
Sorry?
Traumland,
exactly. Traumland des Waffenstillstandes.
Yes.
Yeah, the dreamland. It began the dreamland of the armistice. Actually, though, there was a pretty good argument for the Germans believing what they believed, because they had accepted in the call for an armistice in early October. They appealed not to the Allies, not to the British and the French, but to President Wilson, to the person of President Wilson, for the beginnings of negotiations for peace on the basis of Wilson's speeches, on the basis of Wilsonianism. So the Germans believed they were accepting admission to a community of nations that together would make peace. And that began the initial arrival at what we've come to know as the dreamland of the armistice. Now, the Allies, and particularly the French, behaved as though it was a surrender. And an armistice is not a surrender. The German armies never surrendered to the Allies. And there was all sorts of theater in Marshal Foch's railway car, in which the German general appeared wearing a French decoration that he had been given before 1914, before the war began. And Foch snapped at him as though he were a subordinate officer, saying, "I authorize you not to wear that." And then there was additional theater because the Germans asked the conditions for the armistice, and Foch said, "I have no conditions to offer." And the Germans are saying, what are you talking about? And Foch said, "I have no conditions to offer until you ask for an armistice. Are you asking for an armistice?" And finally, the Germans reluctantly said, "Okay, we are asking for an armistice." So Foch continued to treat it as though it were a surrender. And in fact, it was not a surrender. And so they went their separate ways. The Germans played no role in the Paris Peace Conference. The Germans were simply presented with a draft treaty in early May, and the Germans claimed to be shocked at the conditions of the draft treaty. Now, in fact, there was no reason for them to be shocked. Germans had very good intelligence as to what was going on. There were a lot of leaks to the press. But nevertheless, there was a kind of a public performance of shock. And the treaty in some ways did behave as though Germany had surrendered. And in fact, Germany had not surrendered, and certainly excluded Germany for the time being from any kind of international community, notably the new League of Nations. Germany was specifically banned from joining the League of Nations until such time as the Allies decided otherwise.
The Treaty of Versailles was very hard to be accepted by the German people. Mm-hmm. A lot of historians said that the Second World War, that 20 years later, was a consequences in part of the Treaty of Versailles. What do you think about?
I don't agree with that. I think it was a treaty is not destiny. A treaty is a treaty recognizes a situation at a certain period of time. And I would also argue that the criminalization of Germany was in part invented or encouraged by the Germans as a very clever and effective way of making their position stronger and of fostering German national unity. The one thing that the Germans could agree upon between 1919 and 1945 was that the Treaty of Versailles was a crime against Germany. They agreed on almost nothing else, but all of them, from the armistice to Hitler, agreed that the Treaty of Versailles was a crime, and it was it made the Allies a kind of other that all Germans could struggle against for literally for decades. So the idea that Germany was a completely helpless victim is really not true. And ultimately, the reparations system was, while unrealistic, was eventually regularized after the Weimar inflation by the mid-1920s. And with the Treaty of Locarno, Germany had mostly regained its position in the international system. And so, and really, European international relations came to function more or less normally until the Great Depression and the rise of fascism, first in Italy and then in Germany after that. So I think it was really the Depression which did not cause the rise of fascism in Italy, but certainly helped it and did cause the rise of fascism in Germany, that is the link between the Treaty of Versailles and World War II.
Quindi il Trattato di Versailles è importante, ma non decisivo rispetto alla Grande Depressione del 29, che secondo il professor Smith sarà quella che poi effettivamente porterà l'Europa verso la guerra. Thank you, Mr. Professor Leonard Smith, for being with us. Vi salutiamo dalla redazione del Live, Daniele Monte d'Arpizio, alla regia Francesca Bastianon.